Okay, I guess we can do without a joystick. Alright, this is a demonstration video about the VNAV features on the G1000 in X-Plane. And the reason I'm recording this video is mainly for Julian, who is currently writing the manual. So Julian, who is also the gateway moderator for the X-Plane gateway airport submissions, yeah, he wrote the manuals for the Garmin 430, 530 GPS devices, and also the manual for the X-Plane default FMS. And over the last few weeks, he has been working on the G1000 manual, and a couple of questions have come up, especially as how to VNAV works. And he also found a couple of bugs that I started addressing during the beta phase of X-Plane 11.10. We have a last round of bug fixes coming in 11.10 release candidate 3, which is probably going to be the last RC, the last release candidate for X-Plane 11.10. Anyway, so rather than making a video for Julian that he then transcribes for the manual, I'm just going to demonstrate the operation of the G1000 for VNAV here and send the video link to Julian, and he should be able to get all the information out of it for the manual that he needs. Alright, where are we? We are over Virginia right now. We are flying the Cirrus Vision Jet. I chose to fly the jet rather than the Cessna for the simple reason that we can fly a lot higher, and that gives us a lot more altitude to lose. And we can use a STAR, a standard terminal arrival route, that is for turbojet aircraft. And flying that route from a high altitude gives us plenty of opportunity to use the VNAV on the G1000, whereas, well, when you're flying the 172 and you're flying at 5,500 feet or something, yeah, you're not going to use VNAV very much in the first place. So we're over Virginia. We're coming up to the Roanoke VOR here. As I said, 26,000 feet, if I'm not mistaken, yes. And what we want to do is we want to fly the Alden arrival into the Raleigh-Durham Airport, which is down here in North Carolina. And let me bring up the chart for that. So this is, can we make this a little smaller? Where's the zoom control command? I have no freaking idea. Ah, here we go. Alright, so this is the star, an RNF star into Raleigh-Durham Airport. This is the Roanoke VOR. Right now we're about here coming in. So we're going to select the star, which starts at the South Boston VOR, then select the Roanoke transition, and that means we will be coming in here and then fly the star trunk leg down here. And at Alden the star splits depending on whether we have runway 5 or runway 23 in use at Raleigh-Durham. And for purpose of this demonstration, we are going to assume runway 5 is in use. So we are coming down this way. We're taking like the right exit here over Blinker, and then down here to this point called Gemmy. And what you can see here, there's various annotations about altitude restrictions here. For example, at the South Boston VOR, we need to be at 1,000. We need to be at or below 1,700, and this is what this little what the line over the altitude means, which means cross at or below 17,000. FAFCO and Alden both have between restrictions, so we need to be below 12,000, but not but above 10,000. And down here, Blinker, this is an at restriction. You notice it has the line over and under the altitude, which means we need to be exactly at 8,000. There's no below or above there. Yeah, and then we are going to join a vectors leg here, and then we're going to load an RNAV approach. And yeah, there I'm going to show how VNAV on approaches is different, very different from VNAV en route. All right, so let's go ahead. We have like 2 more minutes to Roanoke, so I'm going to unpause the simulator, and I'll put in the all-in-one arrival Roanoke transition, and we're going to assume that we're going to land on runway 5 right. All right, so here we are in X-plane. As you can see right now, I'm using, let's get the sound down a little bit. We are using VOR navigation. I have the Roanoke VOR tuned here and coupled to the autopilot. We're flying 26,000 feet. And I have already programmed RDU as my destination. So what I'm going to do now is hit procedure, select arrival, and we're going to go to the Alden via Roanoke, and then runway 5 right. So we're going to load this, and as you can see, our active leg now is direct to Roanoke. As I said, about 2 minutes to go. So what I can do now is I can switch over to GPS navigation. Right now we're tracking the VOR, and that's a little squiggly, so GPS usually more stable, so we change the CDI. As you can see, the autopilot of course disconnects because we changed the navigation source. I hit the nav button. We are now in GPS navigation, and yeah, we'll now be following the GPS. All right, so lateral navigation all done. Let's talk about VNAV. As you can see here, we have loaded all the legs of the star. And we have a couple of altitudes here. And if you compare what you see here with the chart, you'll recognize that it looks pretty much exactly like it does on the chart. So for example, here we have a little 17,000 with a line over it at the South Boston VOR, and this is exactly what you see on the chart here. It's an at or below 17,000 restriction. And we have below 12,000 here, and at 8,000 at blinker. So exactly like you see here, 8,000 with a line over and under it. Next thing you notice is that it is a fairly small font, and in between we have things in light blue that are in a larger font. So there's 4 types of things that can be displayed here in the altitude line. They can be either blue or white, and they can be in big font or in small font. And we're going to talk about all the differences here. So the first thing that you'll notice is that right now, absolutely nothing is calculated. I mean, we have a 17,000 feet restriction here, but VNAV profile is empty. The profile button down here is nothing in the soft key. So apparently it's doing nothing. And if you're coming from an airliner FMC, that is of course very surprising, because the airliner FMC, if you load a star, it'll calculate the vertical profile. And as you can see, it's not doing that here. And the reason is the G1000 does nothing until you, and they call it designate the altitude. Let me pause it and change to the G1000 manual that I have up here. So what you need to do is, it says here, this is what we need to do. So altitude loaded with an arrival procedure are published for turbojet aircraft. Yep, that's exactly what we are flying right now. And it said white text indicating that the altitude are displayed for reference only. So it's not actually going to use them. It's a reference. But in the next sentence, it says the waypoint altitude may be used or designated or changed to a different altitude by pressing the FMS knob, placing it, and pressing the enter key, blah, blah, blah. So what that tells us is, well, the G1000, of course, if you're flying a 172, you do not care for a jet restriction in 17,000 feet, because in the 172 you would never get up that high. So the G1000 says, okay, I'm going to display those for reference, but I'm not actually going to do anything about it. And in order to do anything about it, you have to designate the altitude restriction. And that's what we're going to do now. So I activate the cursor by pressing the center of the FMS button. And then I'm going to put the cursor down here over the restriction that is displayed here. And as you can see, as soon as I put the cursor over it, it changes to blue. Whoops, I was wrong. Sorry. There you go. And if I now press the Enter key, I have designated the altitude. So the color has changed from white, and white is reference, to blue. And blue, of course, means it's going to use it. And you will have also noticed that the second I put this in blue, it appeared down here at the VNAV profile. So the active VNAV waypoint is we want to be at 17,000 at the South Boston VOR. And right now we have programmed a flight path angle of 2.5 degrees of descent. And it tells us that we have about 6 minutes to go. All right, and you will also have noticed that this altitude, which was empty before, has changed to white. And this tells us the expected crossing altitude at the T-Way intersection. So we're about 4 miles from T-Way. So we're going to hit T-Way in 53 seconds. But we still have 5.5 minutes to go to the top of descent, which means our descent will not actually have started here. So it says, yeah, well, we are probably going to cross this at our current altitude. So you can see here, this is a small text, and this is a larger font. So the small font says we are agreeing with the database restriction. And the thing is, if I get a different clearance from air traffic control, I can change the restriction here. Let's say 17.5 for whatever reason. And as you can see, it maintains a large font as opposed to the small font. Okay, but if I just want to go by database, what I can do, I can press the clear button, and that removes everything that I entered manually, and then I redesignate it, and you see it goes back to a small font. All right, so this means we have designated the altitude from the database, made it an active VNAV altitude, and we can of course do the same thing down here with any of the other altitudes. And where it's blank, we can enter our own altitude. There's a few restrictions as to what you can do with that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But next thing we need to do is we are flying a jet. We want a steeper flight path angle. So what I can do is I can press VNAV profile soft key down here, which moves my cursor down here. And that allows me to set a steeper or shallower flight path angle. And depending on the angle, it'll calculate the vertical speed target depending on my ground speed. So the higher the ground speed, the higher the vertical speed obviously will be. Or I can use the big ring of the FMS knob and go to the left, and I can instead suggest vertical speed rather than a flight path angle, and it'll update the flight path angle accordingly. There's a few restrictions to what you can do here. So for example, it will not calculate anything that requires a vertical speed less than or steeper than 2,000 feet per minute. So if you try to calculate something that uses more than 2,000 feet per minute, the real one will actually not allow you to do this, much to Austin's dismay, because when Austin flies, he likes to fly very steep descents at insane vertical speeds. So the whole thing is pretty much useless for Austin because he regularly goes above 2,000 feet per minute. All right, I'm going to be for well, moderately steep descent of 3.5 degrees here. I enter this, it says I'm going to need 1,600 feet per minute, and we have about 4 minutes till we hit the top of descent. Okay, so this is the active VNAV waypoint right now, and let's suppose after that we want to hit the 12,000 foot restriction at Alden, but we don't really care for the one at Fafco for whatever reason. Maybe ATC told us cancel restriction at Fafco, expect 12,000 at Alden. So let's do that. We do not designate this one, so we don't press enter here. We press enter on the next one. And that means this one is now designated for use, and that one will be ignored. So everything that is white and small will be ignored. Okay, and as soon as we cross South Boston, of course, we will level off at 17,000 until we hit another 3.5 degrees descent. That takes us to 12,000 at Alden. And yeah, I'm going to show you now what that looks like on the PFD. I'm going to set our altitude buck for, let's say, 12,000. And then we'll see that it actually will level off at 17,000. So you see the magenta altitude here. That's called the flight plan target altitude. And this is the altitude that is the current VNAV altitude. So it displays it here and on the PFD right here. So 35 miles to go, almost 8 minutes, and a little over 2 minutes till we hit this. Well, and if we are not really sure what the flight path angle should be, there's this helpful soft key down here that says VNAV direct to. And what that does is it assumes you want to go direct from wherever you are in a constant descent to the next designated altitude. So if you press this soft key, it'll give us the flight path angle to go directly. Well, I can actually do this. So if I press VNAV direct, that's the angle and the descent I would need if I wanted to go directly from where I am right now to the next designated altitude. So that's what VNAV-D does. All right, but we don't want to do this, so I go with VNAV profile and set it to 3.5 degrees, as I said. All right, and you see, as soon as we are closer than 1 minute to the top of descent, it'll calculate the required vertical speed and the deviation. The difference between the target speed and the required vertical speed is the required vertical speed is the vertical speed that you would need to exactly hit your target at the prescribed altitude, and the target vertical speed is the one you're actually going to fly if you fly the flight path angle that you entered. So which means when you are precisely on the path, those two will be identical. Helpfully, on the PFD, it shows us the VS target, so that value here, 1652, is exactly what you see here with this little chevron. And that, and I'm going to pause right now, is the offset. So vertical deviation, that one, right now 300 too low, is that one. Okay, and in order to actually fly that profile, we need to put the autopilot in VNAV mode. So on the Cessna, of course, you have the buttons right here on the bezel. And on the Cirrus Jet, you press the VNAV button down here. And you can see on the PFD that a VPath arm indication appears. And if you have set the altitude to lower than what you're currently flying, and VPath is active, VPath will engage as the vertical path comes down through here. So I'm going to unpause, You can see the path indicator is coming down. VPath is armed. And of course, you need to twist the altitude selector to go down, otherwise it wouldn't start descending. And there's also a timeout. I need to throttle back a little bit. There's also a timeout. So if you just press VNAV and no path is active, and like 10 minutes later a path becomes active, it'll not descend. There's a 5-minute timeout on it. So if you activate anything, and you don't have a path coming through within the next 5 minutes, nothing will happen. Exactly nothing. Let me turn off the bearing pointer here. All right, so now we are on our vertical path. That'll bring us to 17,000 at South Boston. As you can see here, target and required vertical speed are pretty much identical now. So this is what gives us the 3.5 degrees descent. All right, and as you can see here, the armed altitude capture mode is Alt-V. And that means even though we have set 12,000 as the autopilot target altitude, it's going to level off at 17,000. And yeah, whenever it says Alt-V, it means it's going to capture this altitude. As opposed to, let's say I got an ATC clearance to 20,000, and I bring up the autopilot altitude to 20,000. As you can see now, the indication has changed to Alt-S. And Alt-S means selected, so it's going to level off at the selected altitude. And otherwise, if it says Alt-V, it means it's going to level off at the flight plan target altitude. All right, so expected behavior now. As we are coming through South Boston, it's going to level off at 17,000. The altitude will move over here. VPath will become armed again. And then, of course, our next target is going to be 12,000 at Alden. So whenever this comes through, the path will come down again, and we're going to recapture it. So this indication down here has changed from time to top of descent to time to bottom of descent, telling us in 2.5 minutes we will have reached our 17,000 feet. And as you can see here, it's arming to get the altitude a little bit before the waypoint. And you can see here that is because we are never actually going to hit the waypoint, but we're going to do a flyby, a pass. We are going to pass by this waypoint, and that's why it's arming to hit our altitude about when we start the turn, and we'll see how this comes out. So 3,000 to go. So, thing to keep in mind, the G1000 will not use anything that isn't blue. So anything that's white on here, it's reference only, and only if it's blue, the G1000 will use it. Big blue, pilot entered. Small blue agrees with the database. So that's what you need to remember. White, reference. Blue is actually going to be used. Big blue is what you entered. Small blue is what came from the database. So we have about half a minute to hit our altitude. And what's going to happen is it's going to capture Alt V, even though the autopilot is armed for 12,000. And as we pass the waypoint, the next VNAV leg will become active, and this one will either go to the top or it'll go away completely. We'll see. All right, level off at 17,000 coming up. There you go. Captures 17,000. VPath is armed now. It's having a little bit of a hard time. There you go. And the needle, the VPath needle, is pegged at the top again, and we can see why. So the next active waypoint is 12,000 at Alden, this one. And we have 40 seconds to go till we intercept our 3.5 degrees descent. And as you can see here, we are going to cross, as you can see, we are going to cross Frazee at 14,850. This is the calculated altitude, and it is going to ignore this one. So big white is what it thinks it's going to hit. So 10 seconds to go. As you can see, VPath is armed, and it's going to start our descent to 12,000. Oh, and as you can see, we are losing speed because obviously it has no auto throttle. So if it does an Alt V level off, we really need to watch the speed because, well, if we're just flying along in a VNAV descent and we assume, oh, the autopilot is doing everything for us, then comes an Alt V level off in between. And, well, that sucks if we don't watch our airspeed and the autopilot levels off and we get slower and slower and slower and slower and at some point stall. So that would be no good. So yeah, that's what I actually teach my students, to watch out for Alt V and be prepared to throttle up. Okay, 14,850 is the predicted altitude at our next waypoint. So this is informational only. I've heard the mnemonic that blue is true and white sheds light. I don't know who coined this, but it is actually true. So this one is active. We're going to hit this one. And this is informational only, so it sheds light on where we're going to be here. 14,850 it seems. And yeah, given that we are a mile to go, 14,800, yeah, makes sense. So I'm not entirely sure on this one right now. So we didn't designate this one, so we are not going to make the 12,000 there. That is fine. I'm not 100% sure on the real one whether it replaces this with the big white estimation or whether it keeps the database altitude there. I don't know this right now. I would need to try it on the actual aircraft. I don't know. So, and as you can see here, since the autopilot selected altitude is also set to 12,000, it's going to be a regular, normal, old selected altitude level off. And of course, we're very fast anyway, so I'm not worried too much about the speed at the level of right now. So now we passed the waypoint that we didn't designate. So the chart said 12,000 here. The G1000 knew that, but since we didn't go over the waypoint altitude and press enter, it ignored it. So regular level of 12,000. And as you can see here, VNAV has disengaged. It's gone. It's empty because we have no further designated altitudes. So what we could do here is we could designate blinker at 8,000, and we have a new path now that tells us 2.5 minutes to go to our descent. But we could also say, hey, ATC told me to be at 9,000 here for whatever reason, in which case we would, in which case we would, instead of designating it, change it to say 9,000. Press enter, and you can see here it is no longer small blue, it is now big blue because it's a pilot entered restriction. And we can of course demonstrate a vertical direct to now. So suppose we don't care for those intermediate altitudes and we want to do a VNAV direct to 9,000 at blinker. We just press the VNAV D button, rearm VNAV, and of course that wouldn't work because we need to put the designated altitude down. So there you go. This is our VNAV direct to. As you can see, it has changed the predicted altitudes here. And now we're on a very, very gradual 1.8 degree descent to cross blinker at 9,000. And of course, since I said 8,000 on the autopilot, and the active altitude is 9,000. Again, we are armed for an Alt-V capture. And that's it for the restrictions that are in here. So no further database restrictions on that one. So, and of course, at any point we can go back to the database value by just pressing clear, and that puts us back at 8,000. And if I then enter, designate the database value, and of course now I'm exactly 1,000 feet too high, obviously, because we had aimed for a different altitude here. But I can fix that, of course, with a direct to that updates the flight path angle. And instead of a gradual 1.8 degree descent, we now do a 2.7 degree descent. And that means we're going to hit blinker no longer at 9,000, but at 8,000. And, well, that's basically all you need to know. Yeah. So, remember 4 different indications: white and blue, big and small. Enter to designate, clear to go back to the database value, and turning the knob to change the altitude. All right, so much for en route VNAV. That is all you need to know about en route VNAV. Let's see about approach VNAV next. So right now we're going to level of 8,000 right here, and then those next legs will establish us on a downwind track to land on runway 5. So let's put up an approach for runway 5 right. So we're going to fly a GPS approach 5 right, this one. So the star will have us on a downwind here. So what we can do is we can designate the PESIT as our initial approach fix, and then just in heading mode, because in real life, of course, ATC would vector us on it. So ATC would, as soon as we are on the downwind star here, a downwind leg of the star, ATC would vector us into our approach here. And you are going to notice that there's, of course, altitude restrictions on the approach legs as well. 3,400 here, 2,400 here at the final approach fix. No, I'm actually going to load this one. I'm actually going to load the full T leg here to make my point. What is different about approach VNAV? All right, while we are flying here, let's load the approach. 5 right RNAV Yankee. So RNAV 5 right Yankee approach. And I said I wanted the full leg that comes down here. That would be FOGAP. So yeah, you can see the part of the T here as it comes down. And we are going to have LPV guidance. So we are going to bring up the chart here. And as you can see, for LPV, we have a decision altitude of 620 feet. So let's put that in here. And we're going to load the approach. And now you can see here, so this is the part of the star that brings us down here. So this part. And then we have the approach starts out here on the T and then brings us back here. And that's exactly what you can see here. And that, of course, is the missed approach. Okay, and if we look here on the flight plan, you will notice one little bit strange thing, and that is the altitudes that it has loaded into the approach here. And you will notice that some of them are blue, some of them are white, but we didn't designate any of them, didn't we? So the rule for approach VNAV is that it auto designates altitudes up onto, but excluding the final approach fix. All right, this is super confusing. That means it loads the approach here, and it has, of course, all the altitude restrictions here. And it's going to start designating them, basically what we did on the en route VNAV by pressing the Enter key. It does that for this one, the initial approach fix, that one, and in intermediate fix, but it's not going to do it for the final approach fix or anything that comes after the final approach fix, as you can see here. So it loads the database altitudes here, 2,400 at the final approach fix, 452 is the at the missed approach point, 2,600 on the missed approach. And it has auto-designated those two leading up to the final approach fix. That means as soon as we activate the approach, it'll also activate VNAV to hit the 3,400 here. And the reason it does not do that on the final approach fix or after is that at the final approach fix, we are supposed to have vertical guidance from the approach that we loaded, from the VAS approach or ILS or whatever we are currently flying. So the expectation is that this leg and this leg we are going to use Barrow VNAV, and from the final approach fix, at the latest, we are going to use the vertical path from VAS. So let's do that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to unrealistically just give myself a direct to FOGAP, which of course a real ATC would never do. So what we do is we activate the approach, which gives us a direct to the FOGAP point. And as you can see here, because the point was auto-designated, we have an active VNAV profile to be at 3,400 feet at this point. But if you look at the chart, as you can see here, PESIT and also FOGAP are at or above restriction. So we don't actually need to be that low there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the auto designated waypoint out of the calculation by pressing the clear button. And now you can see here, oh, database says 3,400 at or above, but I'm not actually going to use it. So it comes back as small white. And you see the only active altitude, remember, only blue is used for calculations, not the white ones, is this one that was auto-designated when I loaded the approach. So the active VNAV viewpoint is 3,400 at PESIT. And of course, we can go down and give ourselves a 3 degrees flight path angle if we so desire. And yeah, this is going to give us a nice smooth descent around here. Of course, this is a very stupid route that we are taking now because, as I said, ATC would never do this in real life, would never give us this sharp back turn here. Okay, so our next altitude is going to be 3,400, obviously. So can put 3,400, oops, into the Autopilot. We're going to arm VNAV. This comes down here, and that's going to put us at exactly 3,400 at our initial approach fix, that one, over Jordan Lake. So it's going to fly us on a nice descent now here. So let's see where we actually are. So this is Jordan Lake, obviously. And this is Raleigh. And up here, this one is the Chapel Hill Airport. Yep, that's Chapel Hill. And, well, oh, we're back on track. So, turning over Jordan Lake here. I wonder where the Farrington Point boat ramp is. I think it is here. So, yeah. That's funny. I remember 3 years ago. Yeah, pretty much exactly 3 years ago. I was sitting down here at the Farrington Point boat ramp looking out over the lake. And that is when I decided to get my commercial pilot's license. Yeah, so that's what I remember, sitting by the lake here and thinking to myself, hey, I could really use a commercial pilot's license. Yep, and that was just down here. All right, 3,400 feet, next altitude, auto designated, obviously. Where's my cursor? My cursor is gone. There it is. Okay, and of course at the final approach fix, no more Barrow VNAV, and this is where we should have a WAS guidance for the approach. And you are going to see this because on the PFD the symbology changes. That one goes from V to a G for a glide path instead of V path. And this will change from a chevron to a diamond, like you would expect on an ILS approach. So what we can do here, actually, I can just press the approach button and we could actually start following approach guidance right now. So what will happen now is the VNAV will go away Oh, well, everything, I don't even need to press anything. As you can see here, so VNAV went away, the chevron changed to a diamond, the V changed to a G, and we changed to LPV sensitivity. So at this point, when the final approach fix is active, we want to verify our navigation accuracy, that it says LPV here. If it doesn't say LPV, we would need to change our minimum. If it said LNAV plus V here, on the chart, of course, we would need to put in a higher minimum. But everything is working nicely. Oh, and of course, this is not going to capture unless I press the approach button. So let me pause right here. The chevron, when it says V, you capture with the VNAV button. But the glide path with the diamond, you capture with the approach button. So don't mix up those two buttons. Okay, so I press approach, and as you say, it says glide path instead of V path. Of course, I need to slow down just a little bit. Now it has captured the glide path. Oh, and another thing, as you can see, it has captured the glide path even though I didn't reset the autopilot altitude. That's another difference between the VNAV mode and the approach mode. VNAV mode does not, a VNAV mode honors the autopilot altitude, and glide path mode obviously does not, just like an ILS would. So whenever you press the approach button, you think this works just like an ILS. ILS does not care for the selected altitude, obviously. All right, let's give ourselves some flaps. And of course, by the final approach fix, whoa, those are some aggressive flaps. And by the final approach fix, of course, I want to verify that the approach guidance is right, that the mode enunciator is right, that I have briefed my missed approach, so I need to, so I know if we don't see anything by 620, we make a go around and press the activate missed approach, and that takes us up here 2600 Z-ball and then into a holding. And I can show you how this works. So at the final approach fix, I also lower the gear. Final approach fix is my GUMPS check, so gas, undercarriage, mixture, prop, flaps, and switches. Well, prop, mixture, of course we don't have that in the Cirrus jet. And of course, yeah, the short runway of RDU and the long runway over here. And of course, I prefer in real life to just land here on the very short runway, because then they don't need to vector me around and into the airliners. Save some time. So when I'm VFR, I would actually prefer to land on this one instead. Okay, I'm going to be ready to activate the missed approach here. just because we can. Can actually show you an even easier way. We'll see. So our minimum is going to appear here, of course. It's going to appear on the tape very soon. Here it is. All right, let's assume for some reason that we decide not to land here. So I'm going to put in some power and level off here. Establish some positive rate of climb. Here we go, gear up. All right, and if you take a look here, you can see we are now suspended because we are past the missed approach point. And there's now a really easy way to activate the missed approach. Sure, I could bring up the proc window, scroll up to activate missed approach, press enter. It's fine, I could do that. But the much easier way is to just press the suspend soft key. And as soon as I press the suspend soft key, blop, it's one press, and we have guidance for the missed approach. All right, bring ourselves in GPS and pitch mode. Gear up, flaps up, nose up, and let's see, what was our missed approach altitude? 2,600. Now let's put that in here. 2,600. There you go. All right, that's a really easy way to activate the missed approach. All right, and if we another thing to notice is no VNAV right now. That's also something that is a bit confusing for people who come from an airliner. VNAV on the G1000 only works for descending. Oh, and that was terrible because the autopilot did not capture altitude. What was that? Okay, looks like it says Alt S and it didn't capture. What the fuck? Okay, I need to look into this. And to be fair, I don't know how the Cirrus jet is set up in terms of the X-plane autopilot. Could be that it isn't set up to capture in pitch mode. I don't know why, but it's a possibility. All right, anyway, so we're on the missed approach and we're going to hold at Z-Bull. Yep, this is not working. I don't know. Max did a few changes to the ACF recently, and for some reason it captured perfectly in V Nav mode, but for some reason not in autopilot mode. I don't know. Okay, so that's pretty much all I wanted to show you. So we've learned about en route VNAV, and the difference to approach VNAV in that approach VNAV auto designates the database altitude while en route VNAV does not. And yeah, VNAV only for descending, never for climbing. G1000 you can only plan a descent, not a climb. Limitations as to the flight path angle, cannot descend steeper than I think 6 degrees it is. But you're pretty much always going to run into the vertical speed constraint first before you run into the flight path angle constraint because of the 2000 feet per minute. All right, so that's pretty much all I have for explaining VNAV. And now Julian has it's now Julian's job to watch this hour-long video and make a few pages of manual out of it. That's going to be some fun. All right, that's all I have to show for today. We have one question in the chat, whether this works in VR as well. The answer is yes. In the VR version, we have special manipulators for all the buttons on the G1000. I'm just going to. There you go. We have special manipulators. So if you reach out with your Oculus controller or your Vive controller to touch one of the G1000 buttons, they have a feedback to them. So if you grab it and turn it, the rate of turn of the button is in sync with how far you turn your wrist. And the Oculus controller actually has a little vibration motor in it. So when you twist the knob and it goes tick, 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 tick as you're changing the frequency, or as you're changing through the legs in the flight plan, or as you're changing through the letters, the little vibration motor in the Oculus controller gives you a little feedback so that you feel the ticks that the knob is making. So yeah, I think VR is going to be really great in X-Plane 1120. I'm not so sure about flying IFR in the G1000 because, as you can see, there's lots of buttons to push and lots of adjustments to make, lots of knobs to twiddle, I'm not sure that this is a great idea to do that with an Oculus hand controller as opposed to the mouse or a dedicated G1000 hardware even, which of course is, I guess, the best you can do for it. I guess VR will be best with VFR flying. All right, so this is going to enter a hold now. Nothing exciting to see here. Yeah, I guess that's it. I'll send Julian a link to the video. He can get started on the manual, and you should have X-Plane 1110. 1110 R3 pretty soon, and then you can try all this stuff that I demoed today for yourself. All right, that's it.